Picture this. You're 24 years old, standing in your dream wedding dress, surrounded by everyone you love, when your new mother-in-law taps her champagne glass and announces she's pregnant. Not just pregnant, but carrying what she claims is a miracle baby that will make her your child's sibling. The room erupts in shocked whispers, your perfect day crumbles, and months later, DNA tests reveal a truth so twisted it changes everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and the lengths some people will go to steal your spotlight. This is the story of how my wedding day became the beginning of the most bizarre and devastating family drama I never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Belle Anderson, and 6 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. I was 24, fresh out of graduate school with a marketing degree from Northwestern, and madly in love with Marcus Chen, a 28-year-old software engineer I'd met during my internship at a tech startup in Chicago. Marcus wasn't just smart and funny, he was kind in a way that made me believe in fairy tales again, after watching my own parents' messy divorce play out during my college years. We'd been together for 3 years when Marcus proposed on the shores of Lake Michigan during a particularly brutal February snowstorm. I said yes before he could even finish his rehearsed speech, both of us laughing and crying as snowflakes melted on the diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. That ring should have been my first clue about the Chen family dynamics, but I was too caught up in wedding planning bliss to notice the subtle tension that rippled through Marcus's family whenever it was mentioned. His mother, Patricia Chen, had insisted on several private conversations about family heirlooms and traditions that, looking back, felt more like interrogations than mother-in-law bonding sessions. Patricia was 52 years old, a former real estate agent who'd built a small empire of rental properties throughout the Chicago suburbs after her divorce from Marcus's father 8 years earlier. She was the type of woman who commanded attention the moment she walked into a room, always impeccably dressed, never a hair out of place, and possessed of an uncanny ability to make every conversation somehow revolve around her experiences, her opinions, or her extensive collection of what she called life wisdom. Marcus adored his mother, which I initially found endearing. He was an only child, and Patricia had raised him largely on her own after the divorce, working multiple jobs to put him through private school and eventually Northwestern for his computer science degree. Their bond was tight, almost exclusivity so, but I convinced myself that Patricia's occasional sharp comments about my family background or my unconventional career aspirations were just her way of protecting her son. My own family situation was complicated in its own way. My parents, Jennifer and Robert Anderson, had divorced when I was 19, creating a ripple effect of awkwardness that still hadn't fully settled 4 years later. My father, a high school history teacher in Milwaukee, had remarried a woman named Sarah, who was only 8 years older than me. My mother, meanwhile, had thrown herself into her work as a nurse practitioner and maintained a carefully polite but distant relationship with Dad's new wife. Despite the family complications, Marcus and I decided on a medium-sized wedding in Milwaukee, close enough to my extended family, but far enough from Chicago to feel like neutral territory. We booked the historic Third Ward's elegant grain exchange room for September 15th, a date we'd chosen because it fell between Marcus's busy season at work and before the harsh Wisconsin winter set in. The planning process had been mostly smooth, though Patricia had strong opinions about everything, from the flower arrangements to the seating chart. She'd insisted on bringing 12 of her closest friends from Chicago, most of whom I had never met, and had somehow convinced Marcus that she needed to give a speech during the reception to properly welcome Belle into the Chen family legacy. I should have paid more attention to that phrase, Chen family legacy. Patricia used it constantly,
usually when discussing traditions I'd never heard of or expectations that seemed to materialize out of thin air. She'd talk about how things were done in the Chen family, as if they were centuries of established protocol, when in reality, Marcus's grandparents had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s, and his parents had been married for only 15 years before their divorce. But I was too busy with dress fittings, menu tastings, and coordinating with vendors to analyze Patricia's increasingly elaborate family mythology. Besides, Marcus seemed genuinely happy about the wedding plans, and his excitement was infectious. He had started calling me Mrs. Chen months before the actual ceremony, and would light up whenever he talked about our future together.
The week before the wedding, Patricia had insisted on hosting a rehearsal dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Milwaukee, despite our protests that we'd planned something much simpler. She'd made reservations for 45 people without consulting us, then presented it as a surprise gift that we couldn't possibly refuse without seeming ungrateful. At the rehearsal dinner, Patricia gave an emotional speech about watching Marcus grow into the man he'd become and how proud she was to finally have a daughter in the family. She talked about the importance of family bonds and traditions and how she looked forward to being involved in all our future milestones. It was touching, if a bit intense, and I found myself genuinely moved by her apparent acceptance of me. Marcus's father, David Chen, had flown in from Seattle where he worked as an architect. He was quieter than Patricia, but equally proud of Marcus, and he seemed genuinely happy about our marriage. During the rehearsal, he'd pulled me aside to tell me that Marcus had never been happier than he'd been since we started dating, and that he considered me part of the family already. Even my parents managed to behave themselves throughout the rehearsal weekend, with Dad and Sarah staying at one hotel while Mom booked herself into another across town. They were all cordial during the group activities, and I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, both sides of our complicated family situation would manage to come together for one perfect day. The morning of September 15th dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden autumn light that made everything look like it belonged in a magazine. I woke up in my childhood bedroom in my mom's house, surrounded by my two best friends from college, Emma Rodriguez and Katie Walsh, who'd driven in from Chicago to serve as my bridesmaids. We spent the morning getting ready with mimosas and terrible pop music, transforming Mom's living room into a makeshift salon complete with professional hair and makeup artists I'd splurged on as a gift to myself. My dress, a simple but elegant A-line design with delicate lace sleeves that I'd found at a boutique in Chicago's Lincoln Park, hung from the doorframe like a promise of everything beautiful that was about to begin. By noon, I felt like the best version of myself I had ever been. My hair was swept up in a loose chignon that somehow looked both classic and modern. My makeup was flawless without being overdone, and when I slipped into my dress, even my eternally critical mother teared up and told me I looked absolutely radiant. The ceremony at Sacred Heart Cathedral went off without a single hitch. Marcus looked incredibly handsome in his navy suit, and when I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, his face lit up with such pure joy that I forgot about every wedding-related stress from the past 6 months. We'd written our own vows, and when Marcus promised to love me through every adventure, every challenge, and every ordinary Tuesday for the rest of our lives, I knew with absolute certainty that I was making the right choice. Patricia had been the picture of maternal pride during the ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief and beaming at everyone who looked in her direction. She'd worn an elegant burgundy dress that complemented the wedding colors perfectly, and had spent the pre-ceremony photos telling anyone who would listen how blessed she felt to be gaining such a wonderful daughter-in-law. The reception at the Grain Exchange was everything Marcus and I had dreamed of. The space looked magical with warm lighting and late summer flowers, and our DJ was keeping the energy perfect as guests moved between dinner, dancing, and mingling at the bar. My college friends had driven up from Chicago, Marcus's coworkers had made the trip from the city, and both our extended families were actually getting along beautifully. I was dancing with my new husband to Ed Sheeran's Perfect during what was supposed to be our last slow dance of the evening when I noticed Patricia making her way to the microphone the DJ had set up for toasts. We'd already heard speeches from both our fathers, my maid of honor Emma, and Marcus's best man, so I assumed she was going to wrap up the evening with some final words of wisdom or gratitude. But as Patricia tapped the microphone and called for everyone's attention, something in her expression made my stomach tighten with unease.
She had a strange, almost manic gleam in her eyes, and she was holding her champagne glass with the kind of trembling excitement that suggested she was about to deliver news that would change everything. Marcus and I stopped dancing, still holding hands in the middle of the dance floor, as the room gradually fell silent and every pair of eyes turned toward his mother. Patricia smiled at the crowd with the confidence of someone who knew she was about to become the center of attention, and in that moment, I realized that whatever she was about to say was going to overshadow everything else about this day. I just had no idea how completely it would turn my perfect wedding into the beginning of a nightmare I never could have imagined.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Patricia Chen's voice carried across the reception hall with the kind of theatrical projection that suggested she'd been practicing this moment. She raised her champagne glass higher, ensuring every guest could see her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around the crystal stem, and her smile widened into something that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice catching slightly with what sounded like overwhelming emotion. "I know we've already heard some beautiful speeches tonight, but I simply couldn't let this magical evening end without sharing the most incredible news with all of you." Marcus squeezed my hand, and I could feel his confusion matching my own. We exchanged a quick glance. Neither of us had any idea what his mother was about to announce. The room had fallen completely silent, except for the soft jazz music still playing in the background, which suddenly felt inappropriately cheerful. "As many of you know," Patricia continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each word, "family has always been the most important thing in the world to me. Raising my beautiful son Marcus as a single mother taught me that love makes a family, not just blood or circumstances." She paused dramatically, dabbing at the corner of her eye with her free hand. Several guests made sympathetic sounds, clearly moved by what they assumed was going to be an emotional tribute to motherhood and new beginnings. "Which is why," Patricia's voice suddenly became bright and almost giddy, "I am absolutely thrilled to announce that the Chen family is about to grow in the most unexpected and wonderful way." My heart started beating faster. Something about her tone, about the way she was building up to this revelation, felt wrong. Marcus's grip on my hand tightened, and I could see his jaw clench slightly, a tell I'd learned meant he was getting anxious. 3 months ago, I went to my doctor for what I thought was just fatigue and some minor health issues. Imagine my shock when Dr. Morrison told me that at 52 years old, I was experiencing something I never thought possible. The silence in the room became deafening. I could practically hear people holding their breath, waiting for whatever bombshell Patricia was about to drop. My mind was racing through possibilities. Illness, health scare, some kind of medical emergency that she'd been hiding during all our wedding planning. "I'm pregnant!" Patricia practically shouted, throwing her free hand up in triumph. 12 weeks along with what my doctor is calling an absolute miracle baby. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Half the room erupted in shocked gasps and excited chatter, while the other half sat in stunned silence trying to process what they'd just heard. I felt like someone had doused me in ice water. Every nerve in my body went numb, and for a moment, I couldn't even register what was happening around me. Marcus dropped my hand entirely, his face going completely white. "What?" he said, loud enough that several people near us turned to stare. "Mom, what are you talking about?" But Patricia was riding high on the wave of attention, clearly thrilled by the dramatic reaction she had caused. She placed her hand on her stomach in a gesture that seemed almost performative, smiling broadly as guests began to approach her with congratulations and questions. "It seems impossible," she continued into the microphone, her voice carrying over the increasing chatter. "Doctors said my chances were practically zero at my age, especially after going through early menopause 3 years ago. But here we are, proof that miracles really do happen." My mother appeared at my elbow, her face a mask of polite confusion that I knew masked her complete bewilderment. "Belle, honey, did you know about this?" I shook my head, unable to find words.
Across the room, I could see my father and Sarah exchanging the kind of meaningful looks that suggested they were having their own whispered conversation about what exactly was happening. Marcus's father, David, looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His face was pale, and he was staring at Patricia with an expression I couldn't quite read. The timing couldn't be more perfect, Patricia continued, clearly enjoying every second of being the center of attention. Belle and Marcus's children will have an aunt or uncle who's practically the same age. We'll all be raising babies together, like one big, beautiful, extended family. That's when the full impact of what she was saying hit me. Not only had Patricia announced her pregnancy at my wedding reception, stealing what should have been our moment, but she was already making assumptions about our future children and how this unexpected baby would fit into our lives.
Emma, my maid of honor, appeared on my other side, her expression mixing outrage with protective instinct. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "Do you want me to get you out of here?" Before I could answer, Marcus had pushed through the small crowd that had formed around us and was walking directly toward his mother with the kind of determined stride that suggested this conversation was going to happen right now, audience or not. "Mom," he said, his voice cutting through the celebratory chatter, "can I talk to you privately, right now?" Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered, waving dismissively at her son. "Oh, honey, don't be shy. This is wonderful news. Everyone should celebrate together." "Now, Mom." Marcus's voice had taken on a tone I'd rarely heard from him, firm, unyielding, and tinged with something that sounded almost like anger. The surrounding guests began to sense the tension, and the excited chatter gradually died down as people realized they were witnessing what appeared to be a family conflict unfolding in real time. Patricia's smile became more forced, and I could see her calculating whether to maintain her cheerful facade or address her son's obvious distress. "Marcus, sweetie," she said, speaking into the microphone so everyone could hear, "I understand this is surprising news, but—" "Turn off the microphone," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying across the room without amplification. "Please." The DJ, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, looked between mother and son before Patricia finally handed him the microphone with obvious reluctance. The gesture felt like watching someone give up their spotlight unwillingly, and I realized that this entire announcement had been carefully orchestrated for maximum dramatic impact. As Patricia and Marcus moved toward a quieter corner of the reception hall, I found myself surrounded by well-meaning guests who seemed unsure whether to congratulate me on my new sister-in-law situation or offer sympathy for having my wedding overshadowed. The conversations were awkward and stilted, with people clearly struggling to navigate the social etiquette of such an unprecedented situation. "Belle, darling," said Mrs. Harrison, one of Patricia's Chicago friends, who'd I'd met exactly once before tonight. "Isn't this just the most exciting thing? You and Patricia will be pregnant together, like sisters." The assumption that Marcus and I were already planning to have children right after our wedding was jarring enough on its own, but the idea that I should be thrilled about sharing pregnancy experiences with my mother-in-law felt completely surreal. "We haven't really discussed our timeline for having children yet," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice polite, despite feeling increasingly overwhelmed. "Oh, but surely you'll want to start trying right away now," Mrs. Harrison continued enthusiastically. "Think how wonderful it would be for the cousins to grow up together. Well, I suppose they'd be aunt and nephew or uncle and niece, wouldn't they? How unusual." Across the room, I could see Marcus and Patricia engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Patricia's body language had shifted from celebratory to defensive. Her arms were crossed, and she kept gesturing emphatically, while Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets, his posture rigid with tension. David Chen had joined their conversation, and the three of them formed a tight circle that excluded everyone else in the room. Whatever they were discussing, it was clearly serious, and Patricia's earlier joy had been replaced with something that looked more like frustration or annoyance. I think I need some air, I told Emma, who immediately nodded and began clearing a path toward the reception hall's outdoor terrace. Outside, the cool September evening felt like a relief after the stifling atmosphere that had developed inside. I leaned against the stone railing, trying to process everything that had just happened and figure out how I was supposed to feel about any of it. Emma started, then seemed to struggle for the right words. I mean, I've seen some wedding drama before, but announcing a pregnancy during someone else's reception, that's next-level attention-seeking behavior. Katie Walsh, my other bridesmaid, had followed us outside and was shaking her head in disbelief. The timing feels so deliberate, like she waited until the very end of the night when everyone was relaxed and happy, then dropped this bombshell when she knew it would have maximum impact. I wanted to defend Patricia, to assume good intentions and chalk this up to excitement overcomes judgment, but something about the entire situation felt calculated in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. The theatrical build-up, the careful timing, the way she had positioned herself at the microphone like she was delivering a prepared speech, it all felt too orchestrated to be spontaneous joy. Maybe she was just excited and didn't think about the timing, I said, though even as I spoke the words, I didn't really believe them. Belle, in what world is someone else's wedding reception the appropriate place to announce your pregnancy, especially when you haven't even told your own son privately first? That was the part that bothered me most. Marcus's shocked reaction was genuine. He clearly had no idea his mother was pregnant, which meant she'd chosen to announce this life-changing news to him at the same time she told a room full of wedding guests. What kind of mother does that to her child? Through the glass doors, I could see that Marcus, Patricia, and David's conversation had moved to a table in the corner of the reception hall. Patricia was gesturing more animatedly now, and David appeared to be asking questions that she was answering with increasing defensiveness. Marcus looked like he was trying to mediate between his parents while processing his own shock about becoming a brother at 28 years old. "How long do you think we should stay out here?" Katie asked. "I mean, it's your wedding reception, but my mother-in-law just announced her miracle pregnancy and completely changed the entire dynamic of the evening. Yeah, I have no idea what the etiquette is for this situation either." What I knew for certain was that September 15th, which was supposed to be the most perfect day of my life, had just taken a turn that I never could have anticipated. And as I watched my new husband through the glass doors, still engaged in what appeared to be a difficult conversation with his parents, I had the sinking feeling that Patricia's announcement was going to complicate our lives in ways I was only beginning to understand. The fairy tale was officially over, and I had no idea what kind of story I was living in.
When Marcus finally returned from his heated discussion with his parents, his face was flushed, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, something he only did when he was extremely stressed. The reception was winding down around us, with several guests having already left after Patricia's announcement created an awkward energy that never quite recovered. "We need to talk," he said quietly, taking my hand and leading me toward an empty corner of the venue. His palm was damp with perspiration, and I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. "How bad is it?" I asked, dreading the answer. Marcus looked around to make sure we weren't being overheard, then lowered his voice to barely above a whisper. "She claims she's been seeing someone for the past 6 months. Someone she won't name because apparently he's not ready to go public with the relationship yet." My stomach dropped. 6 months? Marcus, that means she was dating someone during our entire engagement and never mentioned it once? "That's not even the strangest part," he continued, his voice tight with frustration. "When I asked her basic questions, normal things like when she found out, what doctor she's seeing, what her due date is, her answers kept changing. First she said she was 12 weeks along, then she said 14, then back to 12. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the September evening air. "What did your dad say?" "He's..." Confused doesn't even begin to cover it. He asked her directly if this mystery man knew about the pregnancy, and she got defensive and said it was complicated and that she didn't want to discuss her private life in front of everyone.
Marcus, my mother went through menopause 3 years ago. She was on hormone replacement therapy for 2 years and complained constantly about hot flashes and mood swings. She threw a party when she officially hit the 1-year mark without a period because she said she was finally free from worrying about birth control. The implications of what he was saying started sinking in. So either she's experiencing some kind of medical miracle, or she's lying, Marcus finished grimly. And I can't figure out why she would lie about something like this, especially in such a public way. Before I could respond, Patricia appeared beside us with the kind of presence that suggested she'd been watching us from across the room, waiting for the right moment to interrupt. She'd reapplied her lipstick and fixed her hair, but her smile looked strained around the edges. "Marcus, sweetheart, I think there's been some confusion," she said, her voice taking on the patient tone parents use with unreasonable children. "I know this is surprising news, but I really wish you'd given me a chance to explain everything properly instead of interrogating me in front of your father and half the wedding guests." "Mom, you announced this in front of half the wedding guests. You didn't exactly create an environment for private family conversation." Patricia's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly, before she forced her smile to brighten. "I was just so excited. Belle, honey, surely you understand how overwhelming it can be when you have wonderful news to share. I couldn't contain my joy." She turned to me with an expectant look, clearly hoping I would validate her behavior and smooth over the tension with Marcus. It was a strategic move, positioning me as the reasonable mediator who would help her son see that his concerns were overblown. "Patricia," I said carefully, "I think what's concerning Marcus is that this seems to have caught everyone off guard, including you mentioning that you're seeing someone. We had no idea you were dating anyone." "Well, of course you didn't know," Patricia replied, her tone becoming slightly defensive. "I'm a private person when it comes to my romantic life. I didn't want to introduce anyone to the family until I was sure it was serious." "But now you're having his baby?" Marcus asked, incredulously. "These things happen, Marcus. Adult relationships are complicated. I know you're young and everything has been straightforward with Belle, but real life isn't always as simple as college sweethearts getting married and living happily ever after." The condescension in her voice made my cheeks burn. She was basically suggesting that our relationship was naive and simplistic compared to her mature, complicated adult romance that had somehow resulted in a miracle pregnancy at 52. "Mom, I'm not questioning your right to have relationships," Marcus said, clearly working to keep his voice level. "I'm questioning why you chose my wedding reception to announce life-changing news that you haven't even shared with your own son privately. And I'm questioning why your story about the timeline keeps changing." Patricia's carefully maintained composure cracked for just a moment, and I caught a flash of something that looked almost like panic before she recovered. "The timeline hasn't changed, Marcus. You're just not listening carefully. I said I'm 12 weeks along, which means I conceived in late June. The relationship with James started earlier than that."
It was the first time she'd mentioned a name, and something about the way she said James felt rehearsed, like she'd just pulled it out of thin air.
"James," Marcus repeated. "What's his last name? How did you meet him? Why haven't we heard anything about him in 6 months of dating?"
"Marcus Chen, I am 52 years old, and I don't owe you a detailed explanation of my love life,"
Patricia snapped, her mask of maternal patience finally slipping completely.
"I understand you're surprised, but your reaction is honestly quite hurtful. I thought you'd be happy for me."
Several remaining guests turned to look at us, clearly drawn by the raised voices. I could see my parents across the room, both looking concerned about the family drama unfolding at their daughter's wedding reception. Emma and Katie had positioned themselves nearby, ready to intervene if the situation escalated further. "I would be happy for you if any of this made any sense," Marcus replied, his own voice rising slightly. "But you've been to every single one of my doctor's appointments with Belle when she had that scare with the abnormal pap smear results. You insisted on coming to her dental surgery consultation because you said families should support each other through medical situations. But somehow you've been pregnant for 3 months and seeing doctors and never mentioned it once? I had forgotten about that detail, but Marcus was right. Patricia had been incredibly involved in my minor medical issues over the past year, always wanting updates and offering to drive me to appointments. It was sweet at the time, if occasionally overwhelming, but now it seemed strange that someone so invested in family health matters would hide her own pregnancy. I wanted to wait until I was safely into the second trimester before telling anyone, Patricia said defensively. At my age, there are risks. I didn't want to worry the family unnecessarily. But you're telling us now at 12 weeks. Most doctors recommend waiting until 13 or 14 weeks before announcing pregnancies, especially high-risk pregnancies, I pointed out. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she looked at me, and for a moment her friendly mother-in-law persona disappeared entirely. Well, Belle, I didn't realize you were an expert on pregnancy management. Perhaps when you have some actual experience with carrying a child, you'll understand that every situation is different. The comment hit like a slap. Marcus stepped forward, placing himself slightly between his mother and me in a gesture that was both protective and confrontational. That's enough, he said firmly. You don't get to take shots at Belle because you're frustrated with my questions. If you want us to be supportive and excited about this pregnancy, you need to start giving us straight answers instead of deflecting and getting defensive. Patricia seemed to realize she'd crossed a line, and her expression softened again. Oh, Belle, honey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound harsh. This whole evening has been overwhelming, and I think I'm more emotional than usual because of the pregnancy hormones. The apology felt calculated rather than genuine, but before I could respond, David Chen approached our group with the kind of determined expression that suggested he'd been steeling himself for this conversation. Patricia, I think we all need to sit down as a family and discuss the situation properly. Tonight probably isn't the right time or place, but we need to have a real conversation about what's happening here. What's happening here? Patricia replied sharply, is that I'm trying to share happy news with my family, and instead I'm being treated like I'm on trial for some kind of crime. No one's treating you like you're on trial, David said patiently. But you have to admit that the timing and the way you've presented this information raises some legitimate questions. Such as? David glanced around at the remaining wedding guests before lowering his voice. Such as the fact that you told me less than 6 months ago that going through menopause was the best thing that had happened to you in years because you finally felt free from worrying about unexpected pregnancies. You said, and I quote, "Thank God I never have to worry about birth control again." Patricia's face went pale, and I watched her struggle to come up with a response that would address David's point without contradicting her pregnancy story. People say lots of things, David. Circumstances change. Life surprises us. Yes, they do, David replied calmly. Which is why I think it would be helpful if you could share some details that might help us understand how this particular surprise came about. The name of your doctor, for instance, or this mysterious James that apparently doesn't want to go public with your relationship, despite the fact that you just announced your pregnancy to a room full of people. The silence that followed David's questions was deafening. Patricia looked trapped, her eyes darting between Marcus, David, and me, as if she was calculating her options. The confident, joyful woman who had commanded the microphone less than an hour ago had been replaced by someone who looked cornered and increasingly desperate. I think I've had enough family interrogation for one evening. This should be a celebration, and instead, you're all making me feel like I've done something wrong by sharing wonderful news. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the three of us standing there with more questions than answers, and the growing certainty that my wedding day had just become the beginning of something much more complicated and troubling than any of us had imagined.
The week following our wedding felt like living in an alternate reality. Marcus and I had planned to spend our first week as newlyweds settling into our new apartment in Chicago's Wicker Park neighborhood and enjoying the blissful honeymoon phase before returning to work. Instead, we found ourselves consumed by phone calls, family meetings, and increasingly disturbing discoveries about Patricia's mysterious pregnancy. It started on Tuesday morning when Marcus decided to call his mother's longtime gynecologist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, whom Patricia had been seeing for over 15 years. Marcus had accompanied his mother to several appointments over the years, during her divorce proceedings, when she was dealing with stress-related health issues, and more recently during her menopause transition. "I know this might sound strange," Marcus told Dr. Martinez's receptionist, "but my mother announced her pregnancy at my wedding, and given her age and medical history, I wanted to make sure she's getting appropriate high-risk pregnancy care." The receptionist put him on hold for several minutes before returning with a response that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Mr. Chen, I've checked our records, and we don't have any recent appointments for your mother. Her last visit was 8 months ago for her annual exam, and there's nothing in her file about a pregnancy or any pregnancy-related care." Marcus thanked the receptionist and hung up, immediately calling Patricia's primary care physician with the same inquiry. The result was identical. No recent appointments, no pregnancy-related visits, no records of any kind that would support her claim of being under medical care for a 12-week pregnancy. "She's lying," Marcus said flatly when he told me about the phone calls. "I don't know why, but she's definitely lying about being pregnant." I felt a mixture of relief and bewilderment. Relief because it meant the awkward family dynamics and timeline issues could be resolved, but bewilderment because I couldn't understand why Patricia would fabricate such an elaborate lie, especially in such a public way. "But why would she do this?" I asked. "What could she possibly gain from pretending to be pregnant?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window of our apartment at the busy street below. "I keep thinking about the timing," he said finally. "She waited until the very end of our reception, when everyone was happy and celebrating, and then she made sure she became the center of attention. Maybe that's what this is about. She couldn't stand not being the focus on our wedding day?" The theory made sense, but it felt almost too petty to believe. Could someone really fabricate a pregnancy just to steal spotlight at their son's wedding? The more I thought about Patricia's behavior over the past few months, though, the more I realized there had been signs of something being off. During our engagement, Patricia had made increasingly dramatic statements about feeling left out of wedding planning, despite our multiple attempts to include her in decisions. She'd complained that we were rushing into marriage without considering how it would affect the family, even though we'd been together for 3 years. She'd also made several comments about how she felt like she was losing her son and worried about being replaced in Marcus's life. On Wednesday, David Chen called with information that deepened our suspicions. He'd done some investigating of his own, starting with Patricia's claim about dating someone named James for the past 6 months. I called her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. Patricia and Maria have been friends for years, and Maria would definitely know if your mother was seeing someone seriously. According to Maria, Patricia hasn't mentioned dating anyone in over a year, and she's never seen any man visiting the house regularly. Marcus put the call on speaker so I could hear David's findings. "Did you ask about her social activities? Maybe she's been going out more, or staying out late, anything that might suggest she's been seeing someone?" "That's the strange thing," David continued. "Maria says Patricia's been more isolated than usual over the past few months. She's been declining invitations to their usual book club meetings and neighborhood gatherings. Maria was actually worried that Patricia might be depressed because she had become so withdrawn." The picture David was painting was completely at odds with Patricia's claim of a blossoming romance. Instead of a woman experiencing new love and excitement, her behavior suggested someone who was struggling with loneliness or other personal issues. "There's something else," David added, his voice hesitant. "I drove by Patricia's house yesterday to see if there were any signs of her having a male visitor. Extra cars, men's clothing on the line, anything like that. The house looked exactly the same as always, but when I was leaving, I noticed something odd in her garbage bin." "What kind of odd?" Marcus asked. "Pregnancy test boxes. Multiple boxes, all from different brands. They were empty, but there had to be at least 6 or 7 different test packages in there." Marcus and I exchanged a meaningful look. Why would someone who was already 12 weeks pregnant and presumably under medical care need to take multiple home pregnancy tests? Dad, that doesn't make any sense. If she's been seeing a doctor and getting proper prenatal care, why would she be taking home pregnancy tests? Unless she wasn't taking them to confirm a pregnancy, I said slowly, a horrible thought forming in my mind. What if she was taking them to figure out how to fake one? The silence on the phone was heavy as we all considered the implications. Could Patricia really be going to such elaborate lengths to maintain a lie about being pregnant? Thursday brought even more disturbing revelations when Marcus decided to call Patricia directly and ask specific questions about her pregnancy care. He approached the conversation strategically, pretending to be excited and supportive while gathering information. Mom, Belle and I have been thinking about your pregnancy, and we want to make sure you're getting the best possible care. At your age, this pregnancy is considered high risk, so we wanted to know which doctor you're seeing and whether you need any help getting to appointments. Patricia's response was immediately defensive. Marcus, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own medical care. I've been pregnant before, you know. I know, Mom, but that was almost 30 years ago, and medicine has advanced a lot since then. High-risk pregnancies require specialized monitoring. Who's your obstetrician? There was a long pause before Patricia answered. Dr. Williams at Northwestern Memorial. He's highly recommended for mature pregnancies. Marcus wrote down the name, already planning to verify whether this doctor existed and whether Patricia was actually a patient of his. That's great, Mom. When's your next appointment? Maybe Belle and I could come with you for support. Oh, that's sweet of you to offer, but Dr. Williams prefers to keep initial consultations private with just the patient. You know how doctor-patient confidentiality works. Actually, Mom, that's not how it works. Patients can bring family members to appointments if they want support, especially for high-risk pregnancies. Belle and I would love to be involved. Patricia's tone became increasingly agitated. Marcus, I don't understand why you're being so pushy about this. I'm handling my pregnancy perfectly well without interference from you and Belle. We're not trying to interfere, Mom. We're trying to be supportive family members. But if you don't want our help, that's fine. Can you at least send us a picture from your next ultrasound? We'd love to see our new sibling. Well, Dr. Williams says it's still too early for detailed ultrasounds, maybe in a few weeks. Marcus ended the call feeling more convinced than ever that his mother was lying. When he called Northwestern Memorial to inquire about Dr. Williams, he discovered that while there indeed was an obstetrician by that name at the hospital, Patricia Chen was not listed as one of his patients. By Friday, we had accumulated enough evidence to be certain that Patricia was fabricating her entire pregnancy story. The question now was what to do with this information and how to confront her without causing irreparable damage to our family relationships. I think we need to involve your dad in planning our next steps, I suggested to Marcus, as we sat in our living room, surrounded by notes from our various investigations. Patricia clearly isn't going to admit the truth willingly, and we need to handle this carefully. Marcus nodded, but I could see the pain in his eyes. Discovering that his mother was capable of such an elaborate deception was devastating for him. He'd always seen Patricia as dramatic and attention-seeking, but this level of manipulation was beyond anything he had imagined her capable of. I keep thinking about all the people at our wedding who heard her announcement. Our friends, our families, our coworkers, they're all going to expect updates about the pregnancy, baby shower invitations, birth announcements. How long was she planning to keep this up? That was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire situation. Patricia hadn't just told a spontaneous lie. She'd committed to maintaining a deception that would require months of increasingly elaborate fabrication. What was her end game? How did she think this would end? Maybe she was planning to claim a miscarriage in a few weeks? That would explain why she was so vague about the timeline and medical details. She could have gotten sympathy and attention without having to produce an actual baby. Marcus looked sick at the thought of that. Using a fake miscarriage to manipulate people's emotions? That's sociopathic behavior. As we prepared for what we knew would be a difficult confrontation with Patricia, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface of whatever was driving her to such extreme behavior. The elaborate lie about the pregnancy was disturbing enough, but what worried me more was what it suggested about Patricia's mental state and her relationship with reality. Our fairy tale wedding had revealed a darkness in our family that we never could have anticipated, and I had the sinking feeling that exposing Patricia's deception was going to unleash consequences none of us were prepared to handle.
Saturday morning arrived with an unseasonably cold snap that seemed to mirror the chill that had settled over our family dynamics. Marcus, David, and I had agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park before confronting Patricia together. We needed a unified strategy and clear boundaries for what we hoped to accomplish. David arrived first, looking like he hadn't slept well. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, and he kept checking his phone nervously. When Marcus and I joined him at a corner table, he immediately pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "I've been doing more research," he said without preamble. "I think Patricia's behavior is part of a larger pattern that we've all been missing." He opened the folder to reveal printed emails, bank statements, and what appeared to be medical records. I still have access to some of Patricia's financial information from when we were handling the divorce paperwork. I know it's a violation of her privacy, but given the circumstances, I felt justified in looking into her recent activities. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "What did you find?" 3 weeks ago, Patricia made several unusual purchases, David continued, spreading papers across the table. A maternity dress from Nordstrom, prenatal vitamins from CVS, and a baby name book from Amazon. But here's the really disturbing part. She also bought a realistic pregnancy belly prosthetic from a theatrical costume company. I felt my stomach drop. A fake belly? You mean she's been physically faking the appearance of being pregnant? It looks that way. The costume company's website specializes in products for stage and film, but they also sell to individuals for what they call empathy exercises and pregnancy simulations. Patricia ordered a 12-week size prosthetic with a rush delivery that arrived 2 days before your wedding. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his way of processing overwhelming information. So she's been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. "There's more," David said grimly. "I also found evidence that she's been researching pregnancy symptoms, high-risk pregnancy complications, and miscarriage statistics. Her browser history shows dozens of medical websites and pregnancy forums. She's been studying how to fake this convincingly." The premeditation was what made this so chilling. This wasn't a spontaneous lie told in a moment of attention-seeking desperation. Patricia had been methodically planning to deceive our entire family, going so far as to purchase props and research medical details to make her story believable. "I also called her sister Linda in Portland," David continued. "Linda said Patricia has been calling her constantly over the past month, talking about feeling invisible and forgotten now that Marcus is married. She's been saying things like, 'No one needs me anymore,' and 'Belle is taking my place in Marcus's life.'" The picture David was painting revealed a woman struggling with empty nest syndrome taken to an extreme that bordered on psychological crisis. But understanding Patricia's possible motivations didn't make her behavior any less manipulative or harmful. "What's our plan for confronting her?" I asked. "Do we present all this evidence at once, or try to get her to admit the truth voluntarily?" Marcus looked conflicted. Despite everything we'd discovered, Patricia was still his mother, and I could see him struggling between his anger at her deception and his concern for her mental state. "I think we give her one chance to tell the truth on her own. If she continues lying when directly confronted with the evidence, then we lay out everything we know." We decided to meet Patricia at her house in Evanston, where she'd feel most comfortable, and we'd have privacy for what was sure to be a difficult conversation. David called ahead to arrange the visit, telling Patricia that we wanted to discuss family planning and how to best support her during her pregnancy. When we arrived at Patricia's Tudor-style house, she greeted us at the door wearing a flowing top that accentuated what appeared to be a small but noticeable bump. Seeing the physical evidence of her deception, knowing that she was wearing a prosthetic belly to maintain her lie, made the entire situation feel even more surreal. "Oh, how wonderful that you all wanted to visit!" Patricia exclaimed, her voice bright with what seemed to be genuine pleasure. "I've just been making some chamomile tea. I've had to switch from coffee because of the pregnancy, you know." She led us into her living room, where she had clearly prepared for our visit. The coffee table was set with her best china, and she'd put out a plate of the lemon cookies she always made for special occasions. The domestic normalcy felt jarring, given what we were there to discuss. "Patricia," David began carefully, "we wanted to talk to you about your pregnancy and make sure you're getting all the support you need." "That's so thoughtful of you, David. I have to admit this whole experience has been overwhelming. Being pregnant at my age is something I never expected to deal with."
Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Mom, we've been thinking about your medical care. Given the high-risk nature of your pregnancy, we're concerned that you might not be getting adequate monitoring." Patricia's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, sweetheart, Dr. Williams has been wonderful, very thorough and reassuring." "That's interesting," David said, his voice remaining neutral. "Because when Marcus called Northwestern Memorial, they said you're not a patient of Dr. Williams." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like trapped panic. She set down her teacup with trembling hands. There must have been some confusion with their records," she said weakly. "You know how hospital systems can be with their databases." "Mom," Marcus said gently but firmly, "we also called Dr. Martinez's office. You haven't had any appointments there for 8 months. If you're really pregnant, where are you receiving prenatal care?" Patricia's carefully maintained composure began to crack. She stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her back to us. For a moment, I thought she might be preparing to confess, but when she turned around, her expression had hardened into defiance. "I don't appreciate being investigated like some kind of criminal," she said, her voice rising. "I'm a grown woman, and I don't owe any of you detailed explanations about my private medical care." "Patricia," David said firmly, "we're not investigating you. We're concerned about you, but your story doesn't add up, and we need to understand what's really happening here." "What's really happening is that I'm trying to share the most important news of my life with my family, and instead of being supportive, you're all treating me like I'm lying about something as serious as pregnancy." Marcus stood up, his patience finally reaching its limit. "Are you lying, Mom? Because if you are, this needs to stop now. You announced this at my wedding reception in front of everyone we know. If you're not really pregnant, we need to know." Patricia looked at her son with an expression that mixed hurt with something that looked almost like hatred. "How dare you ask me that question? After everything I've done for you? After all the sacrifices I've made raising you as a single mother? This is how you repay me? By accusing me of faking a pregnancy?" "Mom, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to understand what's happening because nothing you told us can be verified. Your doctors have no record of treating you for pregnancy. You can't provide basic information about your due date or the father, and your behavior around this whole situation has been strange from the beginning." "Strange? What's strange is having my own son doubt me instead of celebrating with me?" David decided to play his strongest card. "Patricia, we know about the prosthetic belly you ordered from the costume company." The effect was immediate and devastating. Patricia's face went completely white, and she sank back into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her. For several long moments, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "How?" she whispered, then seemed to catch herself. "The bank statements, Patricia. The online orders. We have documentation of everything you purchased to fake this pregnancy." Patricia buried her face in her hands, and for a moment I thought she was finally going to break down and admit the truth. But instead, when she looked up, her eyes were blazing with anger. "You went through my private financial records? You violated my privacy and invaded my personal life because you couldn't just trust me and be happy for me? We did it because we love you and we're worried about you, Mom. Please, just tell us the truth. Are you pregnant or not?" Patricia stared at her son for a long moment, and I could see her calculating her options. She could come clean and deal with the consequences of her deception, or she could continue the lie and hope to outlast our scrutiny. She chose the latter. "I am pregnant," she said firmly, standing up with renewed conviction. "I don't care what bank statements or phone calls or investigations you think prove otherwise. I am carrying a baby. And the fact that my own family would rather believe I'm some kind of pathological liar than accept that sometimes miraculous things happen tells me everything I need to know about where I stand with all of you." With that declaration, she walked to the front door and held it open. "I think you should all leave now. When you're ready to apologize and support me properly, you know where to find me." As we walked to our cars in stunned silence, I realized that Patricia's refusal to admit the truth meant we were entering uncharted territory. She was doubling down on her deception despite being confronted with concrete evidence, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go to maintain her lie or what the consequences would be for our family when her house of cards inevitably collapsed.
The week following our confrontation with Patricia felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Instead of backing down after being caught in her lies, she seemed to interpret our intervention as a declaration of war. What followed was a campaign of manipulation and emotional warfare that I never could have imagined coming from someone I'd thought of as family. It started on Monday morning when my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. I was still half asleep when I answered, expecting it to be Marcus calling from his early morning run. "Belle, honey, it's Patricia." Her voice was thick with tears, and she sounded genuinely distraught. "I need to talk to you, woman to woman, without Marcus or David interfering." I sat up in bed, immediately alert. "Patricia, what's wrong?" "I'm bleeding," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I think I might be having a miscarriage. I'm so scared, and I don't want to worry Marcus until I know for sure what's happening." My heart clenched, despite everything we discovered about her deception. Even knowing she was lying, hearing someone claim to be losing a pregnancy triggered an automatic compassionate response. "Patricia, if you're bleeding, you need to get to a hospital immediately. Do you want me to drive you, or should I call an ambulance?" No, she said quickly. "I don't want to make a big scene. Could you just come over? Maybe you could drive me to Dr. Williams' office for an emergency appointment." The mention of Dr. Williams, the doctor we'd already confirmed she wasn't seeing, snapped me back to reality. Patricia was using a fake medical emergency to try to manipulate me into supporting her pregnancy lie. "Patricia, I think you should call 911 if you're having a medical emergency. They can get you to the nearest hospital much faster than I can." "Belle, please, I just need someone to be with me. As one woman to another, surely you can understand how frightening this is." The emotional manipulation was so transparent it made me feel sick. She was trying to use feminine solidarity and maternal fears to draw me into her web of lies, banking on my compassion to override the knowledge of the truth. "I'll call Marcus and meet you at the hospital," finally. "No!" Patricia's response was sharp and immediate. "Don't call Marcus. Not yet. If I am losing the baby, I want to tell him myself when I'm ready." I hung up and immediately called Marcus, who was furious when I explained what had happened. We both knew Patricia was escalating her deception, but the fact that she was willing to fake a miscarriage scare crossed a line that felt unforgivable. Marcus called his mother back and told her he was coming to take her to the emergency room himself. Patricia's response was telling. She suddenly claimed the bleeding had stopped and that she was feeling better, suggesting it might have just been spotting that was normal in early pregnancy. But Patricia's fake medical emergency was just the beginning. Over the next 3 days, she launched what could only be described as a social media campaign designed to validate her pregnancy and paint our family as unsupportive and cruel. She posted a series of Facebook updates that painted herself as a brave woman facing an unexpected pregnancy alone, dealing with family members who questioned her joy because they were jealous of her happiness. She shared articles about miracle pregnancies in older women, posted photos of baby clothes she claimed to be shopping for, and even shared a fake ultrasound image she'd found online, claiming it was from her latest appointment. The posts were carefully crafted to generate sympathy and support from her network of friends and acquaintances. Comments poured in congratulating her, expressing outrage at her family's lack of support and offering help during her difficult time. Patricia responded to each comment with gracious thanks and subtle implications that she was being mistreated by ungrateful family members.
"Look at this," Marcus said, showing me his phone with growing anger. She posted a picture of herself supposedly reading What to Expect When You're Expecting with the caption, "Preparing for my miracle baby despite the negativity from some family members. Love will always win." The public nature of Patricia's campaign put us in an impossible position. We couldn't publicly call out her lies without looking like monsters who are attacking a pregnant woman, but we also couldn't let her continue spreading misinformation that would eventually require explanation when no baby materialized. Things escalated further when Patricia began contacting our wedding guests directly. She called my college friends, Marcus's coworkers, and even my parents, sharing her version of events and seeking validation for her pregnancy while portraying us as heartless children who had turned against her for inexplicable reasons. Emma Rodriguez called me Tuesday evening, sounding confused and concerned. "Belle, I just got the strangest call from Marcus's mom. She was crying and saying that you and Marcus don't believe she's pregnant and that you're trying to turn the whole family against her. She wanted me to convince you to be more supportive." "What exactly did she tell you?" I asked, dreading the answer. "She said she's been having a difficult pregnancy because of her age, and that instead of being excited about becoming an aunt, you've been questioning her medical care and making her feel unwelcome in the family. She made it sound like you're jealous of the attention she's getting." The conversation with Emma revealed the sophisticated nature of Patricia's manipulation. She was carefully crafting different versions of events for different audiences, always positioning herself as the victim while making our concerns sound petty and unreasonable. Marcus received similar calls from his coworkers and college friends. Patricia had somehow obtained contact information for people she'd met only briefly at our wedding and was systematically reaching out to build a network of supporters who would validate her story and pressure us to reconcile with her. "She called my boss," Marcus told me Wednesday night, his voice tight with embarrassment and anger. "She introduced herself as my mother and said she was worried about me because I'd been under a lot of stress since she announced her pregnancy. She made it sound like I was having some kind of breakdown over becoming a big brother." The professional implications were mortifying. Marcus worked in a small tech company where personal drama could easily affect his reputation and working relationships. Patricia's interference in his career crossed yet another boundary in her escalating campaign. David was experiencing his own harassment. Patricia had begun calling him multiple times a day, alternating between tearful pleas for him to convince Marcus to see reason and angry accusations that he was poisoning their son against her. She'd also started showing up at his apartment building uninvited, claiming she needed to retrieve belongings she'd left there during their marriage. Belongings that David confirmed didn't exist. "She's spiraling," David told us during an emergency family meeting Wednesday night. "I've never seen her behavior this erratic or manipulative. I am genuinely concerned about her mental state." That concern deepened when we discovered Patricia had begun preparations for what appeared to be an elaborate baby shower. She'd reserved a private dining room at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago for the following month and had started sending invitations to family members and friends, including people from our wedding guest list.
The invitation itself was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It featured a soft pink and blue design with Patricia's photo prominently displayed, along with text that read, "Celebrating life's greatest miracle. Join Patricia Chen as she prepares to welcome her blessing baby after years of believing her family was complete. Despite facing unexpected challenges and lack of support from some family members, Patricia's joy cannot be dimmed. Come celebrate love, hope, and new beginnings." "She's planning a baby shower for a pregnancy that doesn't exist," I said, staring at the invitation in disbelief. "How far is she willing to take this?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, studying the invitation with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, he looked up with a determination I hadn't seen before. "We can't let her throw a baby shower," he said firmly. "If she goes through with this, she'll be taking money and gifts from people under false pretenses. It's not just manipulation anymore, it's fraud." David nodded grimly. "And when the baby shower happens and there's still no baby 6 months later, what's her plan? Fake a miscarriage and traumatize everyone who's been supporting her? Keep the lie going until she's supposedly full term and then claim the baby died in childbirth?" The scenarios we were imagining were so disturbing that they felt surreal, but Patricia's behavior had already escalated so far beyond normal family drama that anything seemed possible. "I think we need professional help," I said quietly. "This isn't just about family dynamics anymore. Patricia is either having some kind of psychological breakdown or she's engaging in deliberate fraud and manipulation that could have legal consequences." As we sat in our living room, surrounded by printed emails, social media screenshots, and baby shower invitations for a pregnancy that doesn't exist, I realized we had moved far beyond the realm of typical family conflict. Patricia's deception had become a full-scale campaign that was affecting our careers, our relationships, and our mental health. The woman who had raised Marcus and welcomed me into the family just months ago had transformed into someone I barely recognized, someone whose behavior was so far outside the bounds of normal human interaction that I was beginning to fear what she might do next in her desperate attempt to maintain her elaborate lie. The decision to seek professional intervention came Thursday morning when we discovered Patricia had crossed a line that none of us had anticipated. Marcus arrived at work to find his supervisor, Janet Walsh, waiting for him with a concerned expression and a stack of printed emails. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about some communications we've received regarding your family situation," Janet said, closing the door to her office. "Your mother has been contacting several of our clients directly." The blood drained from Marcus's face as Janet handed him the printed emails. Patricia had somehow obtained contact information for 3 of Marcus's biggest clients and had reached out to them under the guise of being a concerned mother, worried about her son's work performance during a difficult family transition. In her emails to the clients, Patricia had portrayed herself as a pregnant, older woman being mistreated by her ungrateful son, suggesting that Marcus was under severe emotional stress that might affect his ability to handle their projects effectively. She'd positioned herself as a responsible parent, alerting them to potential issues while simultaneously undermining Marcus's professional reputation. She told Consolidated Systems that you've been having emotional outbursts at home and that she was worried about your mental stability, Janet continued, her voice gentle but serious. She suggested they might want to request a different project manager for their upcoming software launch. Marcus sat down heavily, his face pale with humiliation and rage. "Janet, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything to me. I've worked with you for 3 years and your performance has been consistently excellent. But I do need to understand what's happening here because this kind of external interference could become a serious problem for both you and the company." Marcus took a deep breath and explained the entire situation. The wedding announcement, the investigation, the evidence of deception, and now Patricia's escalating campaign of manipulation. Janet listened without interruption, occasionally nodding with the expression of someone who dealt with difficult family situations before. "I think you need to consider legal action," Janet said when Marcus finished. "What your mother is doing goes beyond family drama. She's interfering with your livelihood and potentially damaging the company's client relationships. that could constitute harassment or even defamation. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own crisis at the marketing firm where I just started working. My manager, Robert Kim, called me into his office Thursday afternoon with a similarly concerned expression. "Belle, I received an unusual phone call this morning from someone claiming to be your mother-in-law. She said she was worried about you because you've been under stress due to some family conflicts, and she wanted to make sure we were being understanding about any performance issues you might be experiencing." I felt sick to my stomach. "What exactly did she tell you?" "She said you've been struggling to adjust to marriage and that there have been some conflicts about family planning that have been affecting your emotional state. She suggested you might need some time off to deal with personal issues." Patricia's call to my boss was particularly insidious because she'd framed it as concern for my well-being while simultaneously planting seeds of doubt about my professional stability and hinting at personal problems that could affect my work performance. "Robert, I need to be completely honest with you about what's really happening," I said, and proceeded to explain the entire situation. Like Janet, Robert listened with growing amazement and concern. "This is workplace harassment by proxy," he said when I finished. "She's using professional channels to continue a personal conflict, and that's completely unacceptable. We should document this incident in case it escalates further." That evening, Marcus, David, and I met with Dr. Amanda Foster, a family therapist who specialized in crisis intervention and manipulative family dynamics. David had found her through his employee assistance program, and she'd agreed to see us on short notice given the urgency of the situation. Dr. Foster listened to our account with the kind of clinical attention that suggested she had encountered similar situations before. She asked detailed questions about Patricia's behavior patterns, her history of attention-seeking, and the timeline of escalation since our wedding. "What you're describing sounds like a combination of several concerning psychological patterns," Dr. Foster said when we finished our account. "The elaborate deception, the systematic manipulation of your social and professional networks, and the inability to back down when confronted with evidence suggests someone who's experiencing a significant break from reality."
"But she's functioning normally in other areas of her life," Marcus pointed out. "She's still managing her rental properties, paying bills, maintaining her house. It's only this pregnancy lie that seems completely disconnected from reality." "That's actually not uncommon," Dr. Foster explained. "People can maintain what we call compartmentalized functionality while experiencing severe distortions in specific areas. The pregnancy deception might be serving a particular psychological need, attention, control, or connection that's become so important to her that she's willing to sacrifice everything else to maintain it." Dr. Foster explained that Patricia's behavior suggested what psychologists call factitious disorder, a condition where someone deliberately creates false symptoms or situations to gain attention, sympathy, or control over their environment. The key difference from simple lying was the elaborate nature of the deception and Patricia's apparent inability to stop even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. The concerning thing about factitious disorder is that it often escalates. When the initial deception stops generating the desired response, people typically create more elaborate scenarios to maintain attention and control. "What kind of escalation?" David asked, his voice tense. "In pregnancy-related cases, we sometimes see fake miscarriages, claims of pregnancy complications that require hospitalization, or even staged medical emergencies. The person becomes so invested in the role of the suffering or special individual that they'll go to extreme lengths to maintain that narrative." The implications of what Dr. Foster was describing were terrifying. If Patricia was indeed experiencing factitious disorder, her planned baby shower might just be the beginning of increasingly desperate attempts to maintain her deception. "What can we do to protect ourselves and get her help?" I asked. First, you need to establish firm boundaries and document everything, Dr. Foster advised. Stop engaging with her attempts to draw you into discussions about the pregnancy. Don't argue about whether it's real or not. Just maintain a consistent position that you can't support or participate in pregnancy-related activities until she provides verifiable medical documentation. She also recommended that we inform key people in our networks about the situation to prevent Patricia from successfully manipulating them, and that we consider involving law enforcement if her harassment of her workplaces continued. The most important thing to understand, Dr. Foster concluded, is that you can't reason someone out of a factitious disorder. Patricia has invested so much in this deception that admitting the truth would mean facing not just embarrassment, but a complete collapse of whatever psychological need the pregnancy is fulfilling for her. Friday morning brought the crisis we'd been dreading. Marcus received a call from his Aunt Linda in Portland, Patricia's sister, who was sobbing and barely coherent. "Marcus, you need to get to the hospital right away," Linda said between tears. "Your mother called me this morning saying she was hemorrhaging and thought she was losing the baby. She said she was driving herself to Northwestern Memorial and that she didn't want to worry you until she knew what was happening." Marcus's hands were shaking as he ended the call. "She's escalating, just like Dr. Foster said she would. She's probably at the hospital right now telling doctors she's having a miscarriage." We rushed to Northwestern Memorial, where we found Patricia in the emergency room, wearing the prosthetic belly under a hospital gown and surrounded by concerned medical staff. She was crying and talking about losing her miracle baby, while doctors tried to figure out why their pregnancy tests were coming back negative. The scene was heartbreaking and infuriating at the same time. Patricia was so convincing in her distress that even knowing the truth, I found myself feeling sorry for her apparent anguish. But watching her manipulate medical professionals who were genuinely trying to help her felt like witnessing a level of deception that crossed into criminal territory. Dr. Jennifer Chen, the attending physician, approached us with a confused expression. "Are you Patricia's family? We're having some unusual test results, and we're trying to understand her medical history." Marcus took a deep breath and made a decision that I knew was breaking his heart. "Doctor, I need to tell you something about my mother's condition. She's not actually pregnant. She's been fabricating this pregnancy for several weeks, and we believe she may be experiencing a psychological crisis." The revelation that followed was swift and devastating. Hospital security was called, Patricia's prosthetic belly was discovered and removed, and she was placed under psychiatric evaluation while the medical staff tried to process what had just happened. As we sat in the hospital waiting area, watching our family implode in the most public and humiliating way possible, I realized that Patricia's deception had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. But instead of feeling relief that the truth was finally out, I felt only sadness for the woman who'd been so desperate for attention and connection that she'd destroyed her relationships with the people who loved her most.
The psychiatric evaluation at Northwestern Memorial lasted 6 hours and revealed the full extent of Patricia's psychological crisis. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the attending psychiatrist, diagnosed her with a severe factitious disorder complicated by what appeared to be a major depressive episode triggered by empty nest syndrome and fear of abandonment. During the evaluation, Patricia finally broke down and admitted the entire deception. She confessed to purchasing the prosthetic belly, researching pregnancy symptoms online, and even creating the fake ultrasound image she'd posted on social media. But perhaps most shocking was her revelation about the extent of her planning. She had been researching adoption agencies, Dr. Martinez told us during a family meeting. Patricia was apparently planning to claim she'd given birth and then adopt a baby to complete her deception. She'd gone so far as to contact 3 different agencies inquiring about newborn placements. The scope of Patricia's intended fraud was staggering. She hadn't just been planning to fake a pregnancy, she'd been preparing to acquire an actual infant to maintain her lie indefinitely. The realization that she'd been willing to manipulate the adoption system and potentially traumatize birth mothers and an innocent child for her deception was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire situation. Marcus was devastated by this revelation. "She was going to bring a real baby into this mess," he said quietly, staring at the floor. "She was willing to disrupt that child's life and lie to them forever about their origins just to maintain her story." Dr. Martinez recommended a 30-day inpatient psychiatric treatment program followed by intensive outpatient therapy focused on addressing Patricia's underlying abandonment issues and helping her develop healthier coping mechanisms. Patricia agreed to the treatment voluntarily after realizing the potential legal consequences of her actions. The cleanup process was almost as overwhelming as the original deception had been. We had to contact everyone Patricia had manipulated, wedding guests, clients, coworkers, family members, and explain what had really happened. The conversations were uniformly awkward and often heartbreaking as people processed their own feelings of betrayal and confusion. My boss, Robert Kim, was understanding but firm about establishing boundaries to prevent future incidents. "I appreciate your honesty in handling this situation," he told me, "but we'll need to implement some security measures to ensure Patricia can't contact our office again if she has future episodes." Marcus's supervisor, Janet Walsh, was equally supportive, but required him to attend several meetings with HR to document the incident and establish protocols for handling any future workplace harassment. The 3 clients Patricia had contacted were surprisingly understanding once they learned the full story, but the incident had created a permanent note in Marcus's professional file that could affect future opportunities. The baby shower Patricia had planned became another logistical nightmare. We had to contact every invited guest to explain that the event was canceled due to what we euphemistically called medical complications. Most people accepted the explanation without question, but a few pressed for details that forced us to reveal more of the truth than we'd initially intended. David took on the difficult task of handling Patricia's financial obligations related to her deception. The costume company agreed to accept a return of the unused prosthetic belly, but Patricia had already spent nearly $3,000 on maternity clothes, baby supplies, and baby shower deposits that couldn't be recovered. She maxed out 2 credit cards buying things for this fake pregnancy. Cribs, car seats, clothes in every size from newborn to 12 months. She'd even purchased a breast pump and nursing supplies, David told us during one of our weekly family meetings. The financial waste was staggering, but it paled in comparison to the emotional cost. Marcus had to take a week off work to deal with the immediate crisis, and both of us ended up starting individual therapy to process the trauma of being systematically manipulated by someone we'd trusted and loved. 3 weeks into Patricia's treatment, we received our first communication from her since the hospital incident. It was a handwritten letter delivered by her therapist, Dr. Rebecca Stone, who had requested a meeting with the family to discuss Patricia's progress and potential for rebuilding relationships. The letter was 5 pages of detailed apologies and explanations that revealed the depth of Patricia's psychological struggle. She wrote about feeling invisible and unnecessary after Marcus got married, about her terror of being alone after spending 20 years as a single mother, and about her desperate need to feel important and needed by her family. "I know what I did was unforgivable," she wrote. "I violated your trust, embarrassed you professionally and socially, and created trauma for people I claim to love. I understand if you never want to see me again, but I need you to know that my actions came from a place of devastating loneliness, not malicious intent to hurt you."
The letter went on to detail her therapy progress, including her work on developing healthy coping mechanisms for abandonment anxiety and learning to find purpose and identity beyond her role as Marcus's mother. She was participating in group therapy with other individuals who had factitious disorders and was beginning to understand the psychological patterns that had led to her elaborate deception. Dr. Stone explained that Patricia's prognosis was cautiously optimistic, but that rebuilding family relationships would require extensive work from everyone involved. "Patricia is genuinely committed to her recovery," Dr. Stone said, "but she's also realistic about the damage she's caused. She's not expecting immediate forgiveness or a return to normal family dynamics."
The question of whether to maintain contact with Patricia became a source of ongoing discussion for Marcus, David, and me. Marcus was torn between his love for his mother and his anger at her betrayal. David felt responsible for not recognizing the signs of Patricia's psychological crisis earlier. I struggled with my own feelings of violation and the challenge of potentially rebuilding trust with someone who had manipulated me so skillfully. After several sessions with Dr. Foster, we decided to begin with very limited, supervised contact. Patricia would be allowed to send letters through her therapist, and we would respond if and when we felt ready. Face-to-face visits would only be considered after she completed her full treatment program and demonstrated sustained psychological stability. 6 months after our wedding day, Marcus and I finally felt ready to move forward with our lives. The trauma of Patricia's deception had tested our relationship in ways we never expected, but it had also strengthened our communication and our commitment to protecting each other from manipulation and toxicity. We'd learned to recognize the warning signs of emotional manipulation and had developed strategies for maintaining healthy boundaries with family members. Our weekly therapy sessions had helped us process the betrayal and develop tools for moving forward without carrying the anger and hurt indefinitely. The planned baby shower date came and went without incident. Several people who had been invited sent flowers or cards expressing their continued support despite the complicated circumstances. Patricia's absence from our lives had initially felt strange and sad, but gradually we began to appreciate the peace that came from not constantly managing her emotional needs and dramatic episodes. Marcus received a promotion at work 6 months later, partly as recognition of his professional handling of the crisis Patricia had created. My own career flourished as I threw myself into my work, finding purpose and satisfaction in achievements that belonged entirely to me. As our first wedding anniversary approached, we decided to have a small, private celebration, just the two of us, without the extended family complications that had defined our wedding reception. It felt like a chance to reclaim our narrative and focus on the marriage we'd built together, rather than the family drama that had overshadowed our beginning. Looking back on that September evening when Patricia tapped her champagne glass and announced her miracle pregnancy, I'm amazed by how much we've learned about family dynamics, psychological manipulation, and the importance of trusting our instincts when something feels wrong. The DNA tests that Patricia had claimed would prove her pregnancy never happened, of course, because there was no pregnancy to test. But in a strange way, the absence of those tests revealed a different kind of truth about who Patricia really was, about the lengths people will go to maintain attention and control, and about the resilience Marcus and I discovered we possessed when faced with an unimaginable family crisis. Our fairy tale wedding ended with a nightmare revelation, but our marriage survived and ultimately thrived because we learned to prioritize truth, communication, and mutual protection over family loyalty that enabled toxic behavior. Patricia completed her treatment program and now lives quietly in a supervised apartment in Oregon near her sister Linda. She sends occasional letters updating us on her therapy progress and expressing continued remorse for her actions. We read them, but rarely respond, maintaining the boundaries that Dr. Foster helped us establish. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't investigated Patricia's claims, if we'd simply accepted her pregnancy announcement and supported her throughout what would have inevitably become an increasingly elaborate web of lies. The baby shower would have happened, followed by fake doctor appointments, fabricated complications, and eventually either a staged miscarriage or the traumatic acquisition of an actual infant. The truth was painful and destructive, but it was also ultimately liberating. We learned that love doesn't require accepting deception, that family loyalty has limits, and that protecting our own mental health and professional lives from manipulation isn't selfishness, it's survival. Today, Marcus and I are genuinely happy in ways that feel authentic and earned. We've built a marriage based on honest communication and mutual respect, free from the dramatic interventions and emotional manipulation that characterized our early relationship with Patricia.
And when people ask us about our wedding day, we tell them it was the beginning of the most important lesson we've ever learned, that the truth, however painful, is always better than the most beautiful lie.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.